Awesome.
We are now recording, by the way.
Okay, cool. Countdown though.
Welcome and thank you for joining us for this last session on the first day of MESA week. We're so happy that you're all here to engage in today's theme of healthcare. This is our Inventor Spotlight with Dr. Arriaga. We are so happy for Dr. Arriaga to join us from Georgia. My name is Josh. I work with Oregon Tech, and I have been the MESA host for all of today's activities. It's my pleasure to help wrap up the day with you. We'll start this session with a brief introduction from our speaker and then follow up with some Q&A, questions including from our moderator as well as from students. I know that some of you have likely attended our earlier sessions, but for those of you who are new to Big Marker, a couple of housekeeping items. First, we've turned off video features to protect your privacy. However, you can send us questions through the Q&A tab to the right hand of your screen. We won't be able to get to every question today, so please be sure to upvote your favorite questions. It helps us understand which questions are most important and interesting to you as an audience. Please be mindful of our privacy policy on our homepage and don't post anything inappropriate or you will be removed from the session. Throughout the session, please post your questions in that Q&A tab and we will ask them at the end. Tag us in photos and videos using our handle @OregonMesa or on Facebook. At the end of the week, we'll share our favorite photos and videos during our awards ceremony. Tune in at 3 on Thursday for that awards ceremony. Seniors, be sure to join us at 2 p.m. on Thursday for a special graduation ceremony as we celebrate your achievement. Stick around until the end of this presentation today to complete a feedback form about your experience, and you will be entered to win a Smart Circuits Games and Gadgets Electronics Lab. We'll be announcing the winners of our session on Thursday during our end of week ceremony. Now I'm pleased to kick it over to our moderator, Carla. Carla, please take it away.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you so much, Dr. Arriaga, for joining us here today. So it's kind of to introduce Dr. Arriaga. Dr. Arriaga is the Associate Chair of Graduate Affairs in Interactive Computing at Georgia Institute of Technology. And she is joining us from Georgia, which is 3 hours ahead of us right now. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and for honestly sharing your story and your work. So I will hand it over to you. And then just if anyone has any questions for Dr. Arriaga, just put them in the chat and upvote your favorites, and then I'll be asking those at the end of the session. So take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to see if it works. I'm pressing slides.
Oops. We know.
It never fails. It worked when we tried, right?
Whoops. Can you?
Oh, I see it there. Is that it? I think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I get it now, I think. Yep. Great. Yay. All right. It works. Great. So thank you so much for joining me, everyone. I'm Rosa Arriaga, and I'm at Georgia Tech. And so just to give you a sense of what I'm going to do today is I'm going to introduce you to Georgia Tech, because I know that a lot of you are going into college, but some of you may not, and maybe you've never even thought about Atlanta, Georgia. So I want to introduce you to my great school. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career. What does it mean to be an inventor? What does it mean to be a computer scientist? And then I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste for the kind of research that I do in my day in and day out at Georgia Tech. And then I'm going to get a little personal and tell you about, a little bit about myself and my story. And hopefully you'll have some questions along the way. And so I'll answer some of them. So without that, I'll get started. So I'm from Georgia Tech, and you might have heard that we're a heck of an engineer. I think we have one of the most famous fight songs. And so at Georgia Tech, we're yellow jackets. And I know that when everybody thinks of Georgia, they think about the other Georgia with a dog, but that's not us. We're the yellow jackets. And so you should know that we're in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta has all these fascinating things about it. I know that Oregon's beautiful, but Atlanta, Georgia is actually the largest living forest in the United States. So it's a very lush place. You know, maybe you might not think about, the South that way, but it's a very lush, beautiful city. We're traditionally an engineering school. And so we have top 5 programs in engineering. So we're top 4, and we share that with Caltech. So you think of Caltech. So we're also top 4 in engineering, and we're also top 4 in computer science with Stanford. So Georgia Tech is a state school, so it also has pretty good even out-of-state tuition is a really good option, and that's why Georgia Tech is often considered one of the kind of best deals for your money. So I hope by the time you're done today, your interest will be a little piqued about Georgia Tech, and you'll even consider joining us for one of our degrees. So I'm in the College of Computing, and again, a kind of a historical piece is that Georgia Tech was one of the first places in the country that actually decided that that computer science was going to play such a pivotal role in really in science that we needed to be separate from engineering. So we have a College of Engineering, and then we also have a College of Computer Science, and that's where we sit. So in computer science, you probably think about traditional computer science, which is in databases and development and software, hardware and things of that nature. And then we also have computational science and engineering. So those of you that really like the big stats, that like to think about some aspect of machine learning at the intersection of machine and genomics or something else, that would be computational science and engineering. And I actually sit in a school called interactive computing. So what is interactive computing? So interactive computing is actually a department that the faculty invented. So even from our roots, we're really interdisciplinary and really are at this junction of invention and kind of forward thinking here at Tech. So interactive computing is, the focus is on a touch point between human and machine. So anywhere you have a human and a computer, that's where faculty and interactive computing sit. So this is anything to do with artificial intelligence. Of course, everybody hears about AI, everybody hears about machine learning. That's the home, one of the homes at Georgia Tech, but also animation. If you think about animation as a real scientific endeavor, it sits in interactive computing. And then there's other things like learning science and technology. So kind of the, computing education and social computing. What is it that people are doing with all this TikTok? What is it? It's actually a science to understand why people use TikTok and what is it telling us about people that actually, start doing it for fun. And then you have a pandemic and all of a sudden grandparents are TikToking too. What is that? Okay, well, that's exactly what we study. Some of my colleagues study in interactive computing. But really, the goal of interactive computing is to examine the impacts that computation and computing mediated interactions, we're going to talk a lot about computing mediated interactions, have on everyday life. So the big issues like healthcare, and I'm going to talk to you about my research, but also other things like video games and how the elderly might use it, or how professors or other professionals might use computer science. So how is computing a tool that people use, either for entertainment or social well-being or anywhere in that spectrum? So, yep, you've guessed it, I'm a computer scientist. That's my day job. But the other thing you should know, and I'm kind of switching into the career part of my conversation, is that in computer science, I'm in this really interesting part, which is called human-computer interaction. So part of maybe one of the things you've learned today is that there are these types of computer scientists, human-computer interaction researchers, and what we do is we focus on the experience of using technology, right? So HCI, human-computer interaction researchers, think about what does it mean for you to, get on a new app, for you to use a new device, right? All of the things that have to do with technology being useful and usable is really what I do. So again, the idea here is, what's the experience that people are going to have with X, where X is anything from an app to a website to a device to a new VR game, anything you can think about with a computing device. That's what we're interested in. And then the question is, well, you know, what does it mean for something to be useful and usable? And so here the idea is, if you have a goal, so let's say the first time you used, you know, TikTok as an app, did you know how to do it? Was it pretty simple? When you first started using filters on Instagram, was that simple? Did it take you a while to figure it out? Right? All of those questions about usability are what I really care about. And also the user experience, right? So it's not just about something being functional, but about, you know, what is that emotional experience of you using that? So was it fun? Is it engaging? It must be. So many people are doing it. The other thing is, if you think about computer science, you might think, well, what's the deliverable, right? Are you going to build something? And the idea is that some of us do build devices and applications, and I'll tell you about some of the ones I've built. But sometimes the deliverable may not actually be real. It might be just a design idea, right? It might be a novel interface. It might be an implication. That is, I study all these things about TikTok, and at the end of the study, I'm not going to build a new TikTok. I'm going to tell you, this is what you need to consider if you're going to build one of these interactive, you know, short video scenario apps, right? So the deliverables are really interesting because they can be either in the applied space or they can be in the design space. The other thing about HCI is that a lot of my colleagues are really interested in the future of computing. What will computing look like 5 years ago? If you think about some of the technology and the advances that facilitated TikTok or Instagram, was really that front, you know, that the front facing camera, right? It used to be back in the day, you couldn't take a selfie because the machine, right? The phone didn't have that interface, didn't have that feature. So what are the new features that are going to be coming up, right? We've seen some of those design videos where you see those bendable computing, where you can see that you can have a computer. I mean, even now you can have a computer on your wrist, but all of these questions about the future of computing, the future of interaction, that's also some of the things I care about, people care about, but not me. I am really very much a pragmatist when it comes to technology. And so what I really want to know is, what can I build that's going to help somebody have a better quality of life? And I'll tell you all about that. So again, I'm a pragmatist. That's the kind of things I build. And then the really interesting part for those of you that haven't thought about computer science as a possible career for you is that HCI, so human-computer interaction, is really at the intersection of computer science and psychology, right? So how do we build systems that are useful and usable? So I told you that I'm a computer scientist, but actually I'm also a psychologist. And in fact, I'll tell you later that that's my degree. I have a PhD in psychology, even though now I've been a computer scientist much longer than I ever was a psychologist. So again, the really neat thing about HCI is that it's at that intersection of social science and computer science. All right, so you've heard about psychology, you've heard about computer science, and really my career is really at the intersection of both of these disciplines. And so you remember, psychology is the study of human thought, perception, and behavior. It really, right, they're scientists, they take that very seriously. They want to make observations and predictions, and then they want to develop theories, and they might even want to help people, right? And they use all these theories. And so that's what psychologists do. And HCI researchers, right, so human-computer interaction researchers, are pretty different. So we're an empirical discipline. That means that we want to study things in a systematic manner, but they don't have to be experiments. So that's something that really is very different from being kind of a social scientist in computer science or being an HCI researcher. You know, being a scientist is not at the top of our list. So in user-centered design, we really are all about designing those new interactions, designing that new technology, those new features. And so the idea is that we use something that's called the user-centered design approach, right? So user-centered design, Carla was telling me that sometimes in MESA, you all have some activities that are related to user-centered design, and that's exactly what I work on and what I do most days in my day job. So listen to Carla, because it's really important. So again, when we say we understand users, right? What does that even mean? What does it mean that we're going to try to understand what a user is doing? So again, a user is anybody that's using this interface. And so the idea is that we're going to try to design, we're going to try to understand the user and what they require. What is this new app going to do for them? What are they doing now that is not optimal? And so how do we design that next iteration? All right, so I think I'm gonna,
sorry, that
my
was my
slide
bad.
kind of went away. That's
That
fine.
was my bad.
No, that's good. So slides, I think maybe, oh, here we go. So I see slides. Oh, there I am. Okay, I exist. And so I told you about those design implications. So I'm going to tell somebody what I've learned and how they might build a better X, where X might be an app, or it might be a device, or it might be VR. One of my students was working on an app that has virtual reality for meditation, right? So we did this study and we say, look, other people that want to build a VR app for meditation should know this about, you know, the practice of this design activity. Again, if you remember from your AP Psych, or maybe any of your social science AP courses, or regular courses, sociology and whatnot, we use qualitative measures. They're very important. So you're going to interview people, you're going to do observations, you're going to do focus groups. So a lot of the social science, but also a lot of the quantitative methods. So we're going to do surveys, we're going to do computing. And then if you're like me, if you actually want to say, does this app really improve people's lives? Then I'm going to want to do a study. I'm going to want to do a control trial, right? So again, we use the random control trial because we want to be able to show that this is what was done. But again, it's more so the fact because I'm working in health and those things matter. You meet another HCI researcher, they might do something very different. All right, so why do I love what I do? I love what I do because I have seen in these past years that I can build technology that it can improve people's lives, right? So really you think about, for me, technology is really a means to scale human effort over time and space. So you think about a psychologist or a doctor, an endocrinologist, or anybody else, a respiratory therapist or something, and you think about what they can do. Well, computer scientists, HCI researchers can really, amplify that, because now we can do it over time and space. We can't only just meet that one person, but we can help all of these people. And so that's really what I love. And then, as I mentioned earlier, what matters to me isn't the future of computing, right? What matters to me is that, your phone, right, is this powerful computer. And so then how is it that we can use just the power of your phone to improve your asthma, or your grandmother's diabetes, or your uncle's PTSD? And so that's what I love about my career and what I do. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my research focus. So I develop systems that alleviate the negative impact of chronic conditions and developmental disabilities. And it's not just about the patient, right? But it's about this whole ecosystem. And that's a little bit where my psychology background comes in. So for me, I don't think just about the fact that you have a person that's having a respiratory illness. I think about the fact that this person has a respiratory illness, and then they don't, and they live in a particular neighborhood, and they might not have access to resources. So what is that ecology of that individual? And so how do we use that data to actually improve that individual's outcomes? And so I've worked with I've done a lot of studies with kids. So kids that have asthma, or kids that have diabetes, or adults that have congestive heart failure or congenital heart failure, and a lot of individuals that have autism. So I work a lot with these individuals, but also their caregivers, where a caregiver is their family member, or a caregiver is also even their teacher. And then for me, back to what does it mean, right? So what does it mean for it to be useful, okay, and usable? So sure, that means that parents can use my app, but is it useful? At the end of the day, can my app help this kid's asthma get better? That to me is the bottom line. Can I actually show that it matters? And so, you know, over the course of the 10 years that I've been working in HCI, I've built a lot of systems. So I have a lot of systems that work for asthma. In the middle, you see this things with the 2 text messages. So one of my favorite papers that I've read, and you might be interested in, was called "A Text Message a Day Keeps the Pulmonologist Away." Right? You can look that up. A text message a day keeps the pulmonologist away. And you're right. It was about, can you send a kid a text message? And will that text message actually lead to improved lung function? Again, this was a random control trial. So all of, you know, what the gold standard is of science to actually figure out, can a text message actually help? Why? Why is it that if I give one kid a text message and the other kid doesn't get a text message, over a 3-month period, their lung function can get better, right? And that's what I study. Another recent coup is, you see it on the other side, our team actually built the official CDC website. So if you go to the CDC website and you look at developmental milestone trackers, so most of us can think about children. We know that, you know, when they're supposed to sit up, or when the kind of things we can see, right? Their behaviors. You know, your grandmother will tell you, oh, this is when they're supposed to sit up, or when they're supposed to walk. But what about those subtle cues? What about those developmental milestones that put you at risk for some developmental disabilities like autism? Those are harder to know and understand. And so we actually built this CDC app, and you can download it for free. If you know somebody that has a baby, it's been downloaded over 250,000 times. So basically you can follow it and you can understand what are all the milestones that this baby should be achieving. So not just the motor, right, like walking or grasping, but those subtle ones, this making eye contact or pointing. It turns out those are really important and are very predictive of children that will later develop a developmental disability if they don't have it. And so we do all sorts of things. And we've done interactive ebooks. So again, there's a wide range of apps. So what is it? Again, it's pragmatic, things that you can have now. You can download that app from the CDC. You could get one of these books. And the fact is that, you know, that's what I care about. Can I actually build something that somebody will use? I'm going to tell you now, I'm going to switch tracks to tell you about the first work that I've really been doing in the mental health space. And so I told you about chronic conditions, right? We think about physical conditions like asthma and diabetes. I told you about developmental disabilities like autism. But now we have mental health issues. And we know that with coronavirus, there's a lot of it. We know that there's probably going to be an increase in post-traumatic stress disorder, especially for healthcare workers. But this is work that I've done in the post-traumatic stress disorder space. And so to remind you, PTSD is a trauma and stressor-related disorder, right? So something horrible happens to you, or you see something bad happen, and it really is shocking and negative. And so you might have trauma re-experiencing, right? So you either have memories or you might have nightmares of that incident. You might avoid trauma-related situations. So if there was an accident, you remember that intersection. Now you'll do everything you can to go around from that intersection. And then it also, you know, given that you're having these intrusive thoughts, then it might also have a negative alteration to your thoughts and your moods. And then it might be that you're super tense and super, you know, hyper aware because you're afraid. All of these, again, all of these conditions are normal after a traumatic event. But the question is, are you able to carry on your day-to-day life? And that's going to be the case with any mental health condition. We all feel anxious, you know, bad things happen and we feel scared for a while, but does that actually interfere with me going, you know, going out or driving in a car or any of those things? And so In general, if you look at people in the U.S., eventually 1 in 15 individuals will have post-traumatic stress disorder in their life. So it is pretty common. However, if we look at veterans, it's basically 1 in 5. So veterans from the Iraq or the Afghanistan conflict really negatively impacted these individuals. So our soldiers went off and they came back. And this is one of my favorite quotes because it really captures it. It says, "I'm left with basically nothing. Too trapped in a war to be at peace and too damaged to be at war." So what do? Right? They come back and again, they've had this traumatic event. They cannot function. What do you do? And so we come back to this question about, okay, Dr. Arriaga, so now you said you're going to build something. How are you going to do it? How can you improve PTSD recovery outcomes for veterans? Because the good news, and if any of you are having any kind of PTSD related symptoms, you should know that you can get over them. You can recover. There are resources for you. NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Health Initiatives, is there to help you. But again, back to what I do for a living. Okay, so how do I build a system that's useful and usable? And so again, to improve PTSD recovery in veterans, what we want to do is we want to what? I told you I'm a computer scientist and I'm an experimental psychologist. I'm not a clinical psychologist. So what do I have to do? I have to go out and work with expert clinicians, right? But working with clinicians is only one part of the story. I want to be able to work with veterans. What do veterans understand, right? What do they think about the process? And so, again, we're trying to build these systems that are at the intersection, that are going to build on top of the best practices in PTSD. And that happens to be therapy called prolonged exposure. And I won't go into the details, but so now we have the best practices. So now the question becomes, how do we design a system that will actually leverage the best practices and use the best computer science? And so we ended up calling this prolonged exposure computing sensing system. And so we'll just call it PECS. And this is a brand new National Science Foundation, right? So National Science Foundation will actually gave us money to go out and answer these questions. So it isn't just, you saw that the second goal has to do with HCI, but the first goal is looking at ubiquitous computing. So UBICOM, which is another area of computer science. So how do we use the sensors on your phone to know where you've been, to be able to see if you're doing your psychology homework, right? Your therapeutic homework. But then also, right, everybody's talking about machine learning. How do we take all the data we're collecting and use machine learning? So just to give you an idea, first, you see this ecosystem I told you about. We have the veteran, we have their family, we have the community. How can we learn about what they're doing by looking at their phone, by looking at their Fitbit, by understanding what's happening within the therapeutic session, by looking at what people are saying? Because there's a catch here, right? So you have veterans, and if you think about the traits of a veteran, it's going to be proud, it's going to be self-sufficient. And these are actually counter to what happens in a therapy. In a therapy, you have to be vulnerable. So how do we know if this person is really progressing? So we use all of these ubiquitous sensing information to get data to start to collect. I told you we're going to eventually, right, and this is very exciting, we're going to start our study next month. Eventually, there's going to be an app. You see the app. Eventually, there's going to be a dashboard where the veteran can see the kind of homework and what the veteran has done, right? So that's the kind of the HCI aim. And then, as I mentioned to you, we're going to look at this machine learning. We're going to say, can we start to predict under what circumstances people will recover? Can we start to predict what clinicians are going to do best with what kind of trauma? So again, it's not enough that we collect this data, but we want to be able to know how can we improve the efficiency of the therapy. All right, so again, because of this NSF funding, we're able to look at treatment and management. We're able to look at not just the veteran, but this whole ecosystem. And the idea is that we're going to be able to impact not just computer science, but being able to send this to the community. As in Oregon, right, Georgia has a lot of rural areas where there aren't any clinicians. So how do we give those clinicians these apps so that they can better treat individuals? All right, so what does this all mean to you? Well, it means that maybe you should consider a career in HCI, right? Maybe you took computer science and you thought, I could take or leave the coding. Well, HCI as a master's degree is one of the most beneficial master's degree. I'll send this information later, but you can actually take a free course with Coursera. You can actually read a book about these, and I'm sure Carla can send this information through MESA later. All right. So now I've told you about my career. You think, my goodness, what a great, easy life Dr. Arriaga has, just sitting at Georgia Tech and doing all these great things, but that's not me. But actually, I am a lot like you. So, and I might be, and this is not to assume, what your background is, but let me tell you about my background. So I grew up in South Central Los Angeles in a very low-income household in a neighborhood that was kind of dangerous. I'm a first-generation student. I was the first student to graduate from, probably from middle school. I was definitely the first person to graduate from high school, from college, right? From my MS, from my PhD. My mom had a 6th grade education. My dad was basically never went to school because they were too poor in Mexico. And then on top of all that, I was also a non-traditional student. So when I graduated from high school, I didn't have the money to go to college. I didn't have the initiative. And so I didn't, right? It took me 3 years. I worked at a mall. So, but hopefully I'm a lot like you in the immigrant, is that I have an immigrant ethos, right? I have that American way of being. That is, I was hardworking, right? My parents had taught me to be hardworking, to be honest, to be industrious, and to be tenacious. So at the intersection of what it means to be an immigrant, what it means to be American, is to take all of those things that we have that our parents can't show us if they can't show us how to do algebra, for example, and how do we use that to make our way? So I always say, what's your life in a quote? And so my life in a quote is this quote by Louis Pasteur called, basically says, chance favors a prepared mind, right? So you can be lucky or you can be unlucky. But a lot of the time, if you're ready for opportunities, then you'll be able to take them. So chance favors a prepared mind. I told you I went to an undergrad school at a state school, right? So again, I couldn't go to a fancy private school or even a fancy state college. So I went to San Diego State University. I got a great degree through many opportunities that I was able to take advantage of. I ended up going to grad school at Harvard. I got a master's degree there and a psych degree there. But again, it was just chance, right? Somebody said, you really should get out of the United States of California. And that changed my life. I thought, wow, maybe I should leave California. And I ended up going all the way to the other coast. In my career, right, when I first graduated from college, from my graduate program, I was an assistant professor in psychology at Southern New Hampshire University. But then circumstances, right? My family, my husband's a computer scientist. We went to Georgia Tech. I had never even heard of HCI. I didn't even know it existed. But you know what? I had a degree and I knew I could make it work. And so again, you can have good luck or you can have bad luck, but if you're prepared and if you have a good education, then you can take advantage of it. There's these research that indicates that you're going to have 3 or 4 careers in your life. And I've definitely seen that. I would have never thought that I would be a computer scientist at this point. And then that I would start doing administration, that I care a lot about the graduate experience. And so that's what I do it with in my role as Associate Chair of Graduate Studies at Interactive. I look at master's degree, I look at PhD programs. I wonder, how can we make the PhD program more achievable? How can we lower student stress? How do we improve the quality of their life while they're going through it? How do I make sure that everybody is having a fair process? So again, what does it mean? What does it mean for chance to favor a prepared mind? What does it mean for you? Well, first of all, MESA and beyond, congratulations. Just by showing up to the talks that you listened to today that MESA put up there, you're already above average. In fact, I always tell my students, showing up is half of it. You showed up, maybe you'll listen to it. Maybe it's not my talk, but maybe the talk you listen to tomorrow will spark something and it'll send you in a direction you've never thought of. So take advantage of those opportunities. Come to the rest of MESA week because you'll really benefit from that. So take advantage of help and resources that are afforded to you, right? In your daily classes, do the extra credit, go to office hours, go above and beyond. Why? Because teachers will always remember. Teachers will always remember the student that gave it their all and kept trying. And then once you get to college, once again, or even in high school, take advantage of the programs that are designed for you. Again, kudos that you're doing MESA, but what other opportunities are up there? There's a lot of summer internships where you could, as a matter of fact, Georgia Tech has a summer internship program for college. So even if you go to Oregon Tech, you could come to Georgia Tech in the summer. So take advantage of all of those resources that are out there because they really are going to positively impact you. Anyway, so I hope that Georgia will be on your mind for undergrad and maybe beyond. Again, we're Georgia Tech and we're heck of engineers, and I hope that our paths will cross. And thank you for listening. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arriaga, for a seriously wonderful presentation. I have always eyeballed a Georgia Tech, and it's a really incredible school for those of you who haven't heard of it. So yeah, we're going to move on to the question section. We do have about 10 minutes left in the regularly programmed section, but it looks like we can go beyond that time. And for those of you who would like to stick around, let me see here. Let us start with the first question. So here we go. So here's a question from our audience. It's a really cool question. How do you think quantum computing will affect AI and technology advancements, including usability for everyday people? And to add on, do you think quantum computers will replace our everyday computers?
Well, eventually they will. I mean, that definitely, right? I mean, that there's a reason why 007 is so concerned, right? Whatever the quantum movie was about, right? Because that's it. Right now, to be able to do those units of computing, I mean, that would change everything. If you think about the basis of security, right? Cryptography. Right now, the reason that cryptography works is because there's a bound, right? So my husband's a theoretical computer scientist. There's a bound on the number of computations that any computer can do. But if quantum computing comes in, all bets are off, right? So definitely it'll change everything. And it's not a question really of how or whether, but why. And so definitely for those of you that are, mathematically or physics oriented, it really will transform us in, probably, 10 or 15 years.
I love it. So I know I told you about this, but I'm for the audience, I'm a computer engineering major, so I'm geeking out about all of this. I'm just like,
yeah,
this is so cool. Okay, so to the next question. As someone who enjoys both science and art, is there a job in human-computer interaction that would include both?
Yes. So there's two ways of thinking about it. So first of all, there are people that look at information visualization, right? Right now, data everywhere, right? But where's the data? Yeah. Literally, it's coming out of our ears, and yet there's no way to visualize it. So if you think about your sensibilities as an artist and your ability to present information in a way that can be understood. So again, to kind of twist your interest into a more computational way of doing it, definitely, right? How can we visualize information so that it makes sense for people? But if you look at even your goals for animation, so again, if we think about some of the revolutions in animation, it really is by trying to understand what is it about the way that artists think about the world, right? And how we can actually make that into computer graphics. So if you love art and you love math, I mean, that really is animation, computer graphics. And then there's a third part of it, which is maybe you love art so much, maybe you love museums and you want to understand, what's a way to optimize the museum experience for individuals, right? So how is it that we can kind of have that intersection? So definitely, depending on, what aspect of art you're interested in and what your interests that are beyond art within the computational part or the mathematical part or even the social science part, there's a lot of opportunities.
My gosh, that's so cool. Okay. So let's see here. How do you think your background in psychology has changed your approach and your work as a computer scientist? How does it make you different from like other computer scientists?
Yeah, so one of the things I pointed out to was the fact that my background is in developmental psychology. And so in development, it's all about change through time. It's not only about change through time, but it's about understanding that humans are not just a human and a device. It's this idea of an interconnected system. And so I'm trying to find my slide with there we go. So in this ecological systems approach, right? Most of the time, computer scientists will say, oh, I'm going to build a device for a veteran. Okay, you're building a device for the veteran, but you're not considering anything else, right? And so the question is, how do we take that ecological approach to do it? The other thing is, I told you that we use user-centered design, and user-centered design is all about the individuals in their context. But as a psychologist, right, I know that people, first of all, are affected by other people. And then I know that there's theories, for example, of behavior change. And so in some sense, I could either build a system using this user-centered design, or I could build a system using these principles of behavior change. And so for me, it was always much more at being able to remember that as a designer, there's a history of the way of understanding human thought that can make me a better designer. So I think that I really did take a lot of that theoretical perspective of cognition, because that was my background. And how is it that what do we know about thought? What do we know about behavior? And how do we use that to build better systems?
Awesome. I'm just like, this is super cool. Hi, Josh.
There's another question. How do you plan to make apps or technology that can help people with diseases or illness? Well, again, definitely, you saw that I told you that when we were looking at people that have PTSD, we interview the people with PTSD, we interview their families, right? We look at Reddit posts, just like I told you. We want to understand what they tell us, but also what are they saying out there in social media. So we went to Reddit to try to understand how is it that or what is it that these individuals need? And then based on all of this information, on that ecological approach of understanding, how do we build something that they need?
Okay, let's see here. Josh, just to confirm, I was told by Rob, our tech person, that we can extend the time a little bit. Does that sound right?
Okay, great.
Cool. All right, so some of these questions are super cool. Let's see here. Sorry.
I have one. It says, how do you use human-centered design process in your work? So first of all, I've told you, right, that you can actually take my course. The course that I teach at Georgia Tech, which is the one that undergrad students take, which is the one that grad students take, you can take it for free. So back to those opportunities that are presented to you. So I told you, if you Google Coursera and Arriaga, Arriaga, you'll see the website and you can actually take the class for free. And as I was saying in my slide, if you don't like my class, it's okay. You can take tens and hundreds of classes. So again, how do you prepare yourself to, you think you might be interested, but what does it mean? Take a free course, take advantage of the summer. So again, Coursera is one place where you can take all these interesting courses. The other place is edX, right? So they have other courses that are in design or user-centered computing. And so basically, user-centered design at Georgia Tech, we call it human-centered computing. So this idea that it's not just about a user, so not just the individual in a context, but really the whole ecology. And so what we do is we understand what they're doing, right? So what is it that these veterans want to do? So that's requirements gathering. And then we take all that data, we analyze it, and then we come up with design alternatives. What are different ways for this same task to be done, maybe with different devices? And then we build a prototype and then we evaluate it. So again, at the end of the day, we're saying that it's useful and it's usable, but there has to be some data, right? So a lot of the way that I think about user-centered design is really evidence-based design. We often think about design and creativity and ingenuity as being a flash. But we know that when it's systematic and data-based or based on data, then it actually is more sustainable and it's more meaningful, right? And so again, back to a little, one of the questions that you asked earlier about quantum computing. Well, the other term that's out there all the time is AI, right? And machine learning. And so how is machine learning going to be used in a way that's fair, right? How do we use it to better understand, that people that are in low socioeconomic areas, right? If we look at the rate of deaths with COVID, we say, hey, that's not bad. But if we turn around and we look at how it's affecting, for example, in Georgia, that something like 75% of the deaths are in the African-American community. We know that, so many of low SES individuals are impacted with COVID because they're working, right? They're not able to isolate. So again, in the sense that data is power, the same thing happens with design and with machine learning. How do we make machine learning fair, right? How do we make it so that we don't further stigmatize and further alienate people that are already alienated? And data can do this. So that's another area that, we really have to think about. So fair machine learning.
That is a super powerful point and something that is extremely relevant right now. I do have another question here. It says, would you say during this pandemic that HCI researchers are working harder to develop those medically related apps for people whose diseases or illnesses are being left untreated?
Right, but it's not only, but that's the cool thing, right? So of course you can build an app, but a lot of the time it's also about harvesting data. So one of the things, so you heard about PPEs, right? The personal protective resources, and that people are taking their 3D printers and printing them. So that's one way that we're doing it. But the other thing you might think about is, well, now you also hear all that mobility data, right? What does the mobility data tell us? Well, the mobility data tells us that people are out and about, that 20% more people are out of their home, right? So all of that data that we can use from your phone that we know, and now we might be able to use it, for example, to send you some information to say, look, there's a lot of people hanging out here, go somewhere else. So one of the projects in our lab is trying to figure out how to take advantage of all of the Wi-Fi information at Georgia Tech so that students can have different routes they can take through campus where they won't have to interact or have to come into contact with big groups of people. So again, how can we use that interaction to understand how to maybe channel information?
Cool. Thank you so much, Dr. Arriaga. I think I'm going to pass it off to Josh just because I don't want to go too far over our time. Thank you.
Right. I always want to leave you wanting more. That's what I always say. You never want to overstay your welcome.
Honestly, you have me there. So thank you again. And then
it was so nice to meet you all. Thank you so much. Congratulations. And thank you for doing this. You'll probably change somebody's life just by having this MESA week online. So good for you.
Thank you. And thank you for being a part of this as well.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Arriaga. Thank you, Carla, for providing us with such an outstanding finish to our first day of MESA week. I am so pleased that we could get so many students in front of such great folks like Dr. Arriaga. So I really appreciate you.
Thank
Students,
you so
please
much.
Stick around. Yeah, thank you. Students, please stick around to fill out a survey so we can learn more about your experience. I'll pull the slides up here so that you can see which survey I am talking about. Thank you for your patience as we get this up and working here. You should have seen a pop-up on your screen just a few minutes ago offering, there it is, thank you, a survey. Please do participate in that, and remember that folks who take part in that survey will be entered to win a Smart Circuits Games and Gadgets Electronics Lab. We're going to announce the winners of our session on Thursday during our end of week ceremony. MESA Week continues tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Tomorrow's theme is engineering, and will feature more guest speakers, including folks from Nike's engineering team, our friends at OMSI, another Inventor Spotlight, and PSU's admissions team to let you know a little bit more about what to expect from college. Thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a good
Bye,
night.
everyone.